When it comes to narrative-driven games like Deliver Us the Moon, I always have a difficult time reviewing them. So often the focus in these games is shifted from gameplay and mechanics to narrative and atmosphere, and at that point, I might as well just be reading a book or watching a film. For my money, the best of these games deliver on story and ambiance without neglecting the interactivity of being a video game. And this is something that Deliver Us the Moon accomplishes, though not without some noticeably rough edges. Deliver Us the Moon is set in a post-apocalyptic near future in which the Earth's natural resources have been depleted, leading to our moon being colonized and mined for a new and plentiful source of energy. However, a few years back, all communications from the colony ceased, as did the transfer of helium-3, the energy source in question, plunging the Earth right back into its energy crisis. Now you take on the role of the world's last astronaut on a mission to investigate the silent colony and potentially save humanity. As far as setups go, I found Deliver Us the Moon's premise to be super effective. The mystery of the abandoned colony is the main narrative thrust for the game's majority, and it had me hooked immediately, but players who prefer a little more interpersonal drama aren't left out in the cold either. While you try to figure out exactly what happened years earlier, you'll find plenty of collectible notes and audio logs to flesh out the story of the missing colonists. On top of all this, there's also a subplot that follows another astronaut investigating the colony years before you, and it's surprising how this element intertwines with the main mystery as well as your own journey. Overall, Deliver Us the Moon has a surprisingly emotional payoff and even manages to throw in a handful of surprising twists, though the answer to the core mystery is unlikely to catch anyone off guard. Deliver Us the Moon's immersive story is bolstered by decent voice work and a sparse soundtrack, which establishes a suitably lonely atmosphere throughout the game's eerie, abandoned environments. I also appreciate the game's use of environmental storytelling, which is frequent but never too blunt. It's a shame then that the game suffers from a laundry list of technical issues that detract from the experience, on the original Xbox One at least. From severe texture pop-in to constant hitching during loading periods, Deliver Us the Moon is far from polished on the original Xbox One, and to call it a little distracting would be an understatement. Almost every note that I picked up took a couple of seconds to load in properly and become readable, and there were a number of occasions where the game's visual hitching had me thinking that it had crashed entirely. Now, these issues don't make the game unplayable by any means, but it's disappointing for sure, especially seeing as the game doesn't seem all that demanding on the surface. To the game's credit, while it stumbles with its technical elements, Deliver Us the Moon does give players a surprising amount to interact with, as it leans more towards being a traditional adventure game than a so-called walking simulator. For the most part, Deliver Us the Moon will have you delving deeper and deeper into the abandoned lunar colony, and in doing so, tasks you with finding codes or solving item-based puzzles to progress. The majority of these puzzles aren't super difficult, simply requiring you to find a handful of key items in the environment like power cells or machine parts and using them in the correct order, but later areas feature much larger, more complex puzzles that require a lot of back and forth between rooms. A handful of the game's puzzles also involve the use of a small drone called an ASE, which you can manually control and use to access much smaller areas or interact with special switches. Once again, this mechanic is fairly straightforward to begin with, but it's implemented in a more challenging fashion near the end of the game, and controlling the drone as a whole is fairly responsive, though you'll definitely want to increase your camera sensitivity to the max as soon as possible. Speaking of camera sensitivity, movement on the whole, whether in first or third person, is generally a little sluggish and imprecise, but bumping up your camera sensitivity fixes my biggest problems with it, that is, the painfully slow turning speed. Believe me, floating around in zero-gravity environments can become incredibly frustrating when simply turning to look in a direction takes a good couple of seconds. I can't say that I was impressed by the game's simple platforming sequences either, even after tweaking my camera settings, but I wouldn't call them offensively bad. They're simply functional and infrequent, but they do serve to break up the slower, puzzle-based gameplay sections alongside the odd vehicle section or QuickTime event. On that note, Deliver Us the Moon has a handful of infrequent mechanics that it throws at players, and they're a bit of a mixed bag. Driving the lunar rover is a nice change of pace, for instance, but although it's functional, the game only manages to find one moment to use it in an exciting way. The rare use of QuickTime events, conversely, makes for some exciting moments, but because they come out of nowhere, you're almost guaranteed to fail them the first time they show up. It's a shame that the game resorts to surprise QTEs to ratchet up the drama too, because it does that just fine during the handful of sequences where you have a time limit or an ever-depleting oxygen tank to work against. I appreciate that these mechanics are used by Deliver Us the Moon to achieve some mechanical diversity, but they just didn't really do much for me. They're by no means bad, they're just kinda shallow and innocuous. The game is definitely at its best when you're left to wander around its deserted outposts, encountering scraps of plot and solving its steady influx of puzzles, and the focus on Deliver Us the Moon's narrative really shows. But that focus is a bit of a double-edged sword. It means that the game doesn't really have a huge amount of inherent replay value. You can always try to find more information on subsequent playthroughs, but there's not a whole lot to tempt players back beyond experiencing the story once again with the knowledge of how it all plays out. I think it's a narrative worth checking out, for sure, but depending on your tastes, that may not be worth the price of entry. With all that said, Deliver Us the Moon is good. Deliver Us the Moon is a tricky game for me to rate. On the one hand, it's got a fantastic story with plenty of surprising subplots and interpersonal drama, and the game's puzzles are usually clever without being obtuse. But on the other hand, Deliver Us the Moon features a number of ancillary gameplay elements that never quite hit their mark, and my time with the game was marred by frequent and noticeable technical issues. But I'm willing to err on the side of positivity here. I think that the narrative that Deliver Us the Moon is trying to tell is really impactful, and it sets itself apart from so many other narrative experiences by making your character feel integral to the plot. You aren't just an observer, you've got a job to do. If you're in the market for a good story and can look beyond a few rough edges, then I would gladly recommend checking this out. Deliver Us the Moon has been available on PC for years now, but this month marks its debut on the PS4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One, and as of time of recording, it is available on Game Pass.